Welcome to Beyond the Comic Panels, a film for aspiring comic book writers, pencilers, inkers, colorists, and publishers exploring tips, tricks, techniques, and industry secrets that can help you hone your craft, helping you get inspired to break into this creative field. If you've been hesitating to get into this field, thinking you're not good enough, hopefully this film will give you the courage to believe in yourself and pursue your dream. If you haven't seen any of my previous works and don't know who I am, let me introduce myself. Jason Garris is the name, and documentary filmmaking is what I do. Going back even further, for many years, I was into the hobby of building and painting scale model kits. I've been doing that on and off since I was at least 7 or 8 years old. I've built models for independent films, private collectors, and for various magazine publications. I even turned my love for model kit building into a series of instructional how-to videos that can be viewed on various streaming platforms worldwide. So at this point, you're most likely asking yourself, why is this Jason guy hosting a film about the comic book business if he's not doing anything related to comic books? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's start at the beginning. In 1979, I was visiting my grandparents, and one day, my grandfather took me grocery shopping with him. As he went about his business at the grocery store, I was left to look at the white spinner rack of comic books. The one that caught my eye was Shogun Warriors No. 2, which he bought for me. I loved everything and anything having to do with giant robots fighting giant monsters. This comic book was right up my alley. This was the genesis of my love and interest in comic books. From this point forth, I became a comic book reader and collector. Fast forward to 1987, my freshman year of high school. A comic book store I would frequent became my first job. Located on the north side of Milwaukee, Polaris Comics was where I learned about the comic book business by some of the local artists that would come in. I would learn about deadlines, tricks of the trade, and perhaps other things that I shouldn't have found out about. You know, shop talk about the various comic book companies they worked for. All in all, it was the best 4 years of employment I ever had. I worked around material I loved and learned a lot from the creative regulars. Continuing with the subject of my high school years, I met a fellow comic book reader and artist by the name of Bill that had the same interests I did. We hung out a lot. He liked to draw as well as I, and we had all these crazy ideas for comic book stories and series. Eventually, Bill came up with a character by the name of Mojo the Clown. The name of the clown was inspired by the Doors song, LA Woman, where lead singer Jim Morrison sings the line, "Mr. Mojo Risin'." Bill and I would come up with stories, Bill would take care of the pencils, and I would do the inking. It was a fun collaborative effort by both of us, and we felt like a team. After high school, in my first year of college, I submitted a Mojo the Clown comic strip Bill and I put together for the bi-weekly college newspaper, The Times. A week later, I was contacted by the newspaper editor that he was interested printing Mojo the Clown every other week when they published the paper. Bill and I were in print for the very first time, and we were ecstatic that Mojo was going to get read and hopefully noticed by more people than just Bill and myself. In 1990, I read an ad in a comic book trade magazine advertising a new magazine being published that was looking for artists. Bill and I submitted 2 strips of Mojo the Clown that were previously printed in the college newspaper as samples. The new magazine was marked as being Mad and Cracked magazines combined, but a little more crude, rude, and edgy. Warped Magazine was a new venture by comic book artist Rich Buckler, who was known for his work on Marvel Comics' Fantastic Four in the mid-1970s and for creating the iconic character Deathlock in Astonishing Tales 25. He was also known for being a cover artist and having drawn every well-known character at both Marvel and DC Comics. After a couple of weeks, I received a handwritten letter of acceptance from Rich. A phone call with Rich would reveal that Bill and I would earn $50 a page and that Mojo would be intertwined into many facets of each issue, eventually becoming the Warped Magazine mascot, which would also mean higher earnings for Bill and I. Mojo the Clown was going to be seen worldwide and our careers in comics was going to start. Or was it? For some reason, my friend Bill was losing interest in Mojo, and this was shortly after getting the job with Warped Magazine. Luckily, we didn't sign a contract, we had a verbal agreement on a per-issue basis. Bill gave me permission to write and draw 3 of my own pages and send them in to Rich until he could decide what he wanted to do. A couple weeks went by, Bill and I met, and decided to drop Mojo and start a new venture loosely based on ourselves with influences of Bill and Ted and Cheech and Chong sprinkled on top. The new comic strip would be called The Martini Brothers. The story outline was very simple. The Martini Brothers, which consisted of JJ, which looked like me, and Mooch, looking like Bill, would get caught up in wild adventures with a large helping of comedy thrown in for good measure. I sent 2 pages into Rich and he loved them, but there was one catch. He still wanted Mojo the Clown. He would accept the Martini Brothers only if Mojo was part of the package. Holy moly, that meant Bill and I could earn at least $150 an issue. Since Mojo was created by Bill, it was his decision to go forward or not. And he decided not to. Bill decided he wanted to take a break from Mojo and do other things. Seeing the huge potential of Mojo and having the chance to work with a talent like Rich Buckler, coming to this conclusion put a rift between Bill and I, as I opposed his decision. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that basically fell in our laps, and I feel he was throwing it away. We stopped being partners, and unfortunately, friends as well. After that ordeal, I decided to put my talents back into model kit building and painting, as I didn't need a partner for that. It was something I could do alone. I did a lot of commission work in the 1990s, so much so I got burned out and didn't touch a model for 10 years. I got back into the hobby once again in the early 2000s, did more commission work, then decided to try out filmmaking, passion I had since I was a kid. I mixed filmmaking and model kit building together to make several instructional video features and a web-based series. So here we are, back full circle, paying homage to the medium that started my love for art of all kinds, comic books. I decided that a great way to explain this unique art form more in depth wouldn't be from me, but from professional artists, illustrators, animators, writers, and publishers that know the industry the best, those who work in it and have done so for many years. With the permission of Wizard World Madison, I interview 10 professionals who give advice on how to prepare and break into the field. Grab your pencils, pens, and paper for a visit to a place that promotes fun and creativity. Wizard World in Madison, Wisconsin. Tell me who you are and your background.
We're Insane Comics. We're an independent publishing company based out of Rockford, Illinois. And what we do is take creator-owned works of art from all over the world, publish them, and produce them so that individuals get to see something different from the mainstream comics.
My name's Jeff Butler. I'm an artist. I got into comics by helping Mike Baron create the Badger back in the early 80s. I also helped Ron Fortier bring the Green Hornet back to comic books in the late 80s. In between then, I worked as a staff artist at TSR Incorporated, which is the creator of Dungeons & Dragons. And while I was there, I worked on the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, which was a lot of fun to do. I was the principal artist on that. Then, after the Green Hornet, I did a lot of various odd commercial jobs and other comic jobs. Mike Friedrich and Sharon Shaw were my agents, and I did a lot of independent comic work then. And then in the late 90s, I moved back to my hometown here, Madison, and I took a job with Raven Software, and I spent about 13, 14 years working in the video game industry. An interesting side note about that is while I was there, I worked on about 12 AAA games, and several of them were Marvel Superheroes games, because they had the license for that. X-Men Legends 1 and 2, Marvel Ultimate Alliance. I was the lead character artist on those games. And after that, we did X-Men Origins Wolverine, which is a lot of fun too. So it's pretty much my background. Now I teach at Madison Area Technical College, and I teach some fun classes on character design and comic art and character maquette sculpting in the continuing education program, and I also teach drawing in the graphic design and illustration program.
My name is Mr. Mark Kistler. A lot of you viewers might remember me from the Imagination Station, from when I wore suspenders. Some of you might remember me from the Secret City. I just have my props here from when I wore a spacesuit. Can you imagine being remembered for something that you did when you were 19 years old? All right, I am 54 years old now, and I've toured the world and taught and lectured at universities and high schools and elementary schools, and I'm most remembered for what I did back in 1985 on the Secret City, and 1995 the Imagination Station, it's very rewarding knowing that you viewers that do remember, I appreciate it. It validates a whole career devoted to developing imagination and creativity, and my belief that anyone can draw. Anyone really can draw, and through that philosophy, I've been able to teach millions of folks how to draw. It's been such a fun journey.
Hi, my name is Mark Stegbauer. I've been a comic book artist for the last 26 plus years. Worked my way up from working at the independent companies and got to work on Spider-Man at Marvel and various other titles there. A lot of titles over at DC like The Flash and Justice League. Worked on lots of independent books, and now I'm the artist and co-creator of Ghoul Scouts, which is published by Action Lab Comics.
My name is Mustafa Musa. My background, that's a tough question to answer. My background, I guess, I'm a comic book artist. I've been doing comics for 19 years. It's something I always did in my free time growing up as a kid, so once I graduated, I just said, hey, let me see if I can do this, and if not, I can always go to college and, you know, get a real world job. And then I just got stuck doing this. I got work right away, and then the companies kept getting bigger and bigger, and now I've worked for almost every company out there.
Tell me who you are and your background.
I'm Nick Choles, and my background is I'm an illustrator, and I'm currently a senior concept artist with a video game company.
My name is Samantha Gurrell. I started drawing probably around 6th grade, and I'm entirely self-taught. Now I'm a professional anime artist. I have a book out called Manga the Mega Guide that's published internationally. It's in Barnes & Noble, it's in Amazon, it's Waterstones worldwide, so I'm very excited about that. And I work for the International School of Comics in Chicago currently as their anime art instructor, and I'm here at Wizard World Comic Con selling my art.
My name is Steve Levine. I have worked for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for 32 years. I started early on the lettering, did graphic novels, and when it became the Pete Seed and Cowabunga Turtles, I drew most of that stuff.
Well, my name is Tom Cook. I was an animator, a director on many TV shows starting in 1978 on Super Friends, Scooby-Doo, Smurfs, Flintstones. Eventually moved over to Ruby Spears, where I did Thunder the Barbarian, Plastic Man, Heathcliff the Cat. And then over to Filmation, where I did He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, She-Ra, Ghostbusters, Brave Star. And then I went on to direct episodes of King of the Hill, Godzilla, Duckman, lots of different shows like that. So nice, long, and varied career.
Hi, I'm Steve Geiger, and I'm a Marvel Comics artist, and well, professional comic artist, but I got my start at Marvel and spent most of my career there. And I still do some occasional work for them, a cover or so now and then. And I am currently on tour at a lot of the Comic Cons throughout the country over the last couple of years. And I'm doing work for 412 Comics, which will be premiering in January. And also, shameless plug, this is a cover for Bachelor's Grove, Tale of Haunted Tales of.
My name is Barbara Kjellberg, and I am an inker. I have been an inker for 30 years. Started out in 1988, 89, something like that.
My name is Jeffrey Moy. I am a comic book illustrator and concept artist and storyboard artist. My background is I went to Northern Illinois University, and I got a BFA in illustration in like 1991. From there, it's like I grew up around the Chicago area, but I've moved up to Madison, Wisconsin, where I worked for Raven Software for about 9.5 years, and then I was let go from there. But I continue to live in Madison, Wisconsin, where I work on my Patreon page, and I also do contract work for our other video game companies in the area and outside the area as well.
I'm Steve Levine, and you are watching The Comic Panel.
Beyond the Comic
Beyond the Comic Panel.
Okay.
Oh, on two. I'm Steve Levine, and you are watching Beyond the Comic Panel.
Awesome. Thank you. What are your favorite tools of the trade?
I think the favorite tools of the trade have to be the communication aspect that I provide when I present these comics on behalf of the creators.
Well, I'm an old-fashioned cartoonist, I think. So I love inking. I love inking with a brush. And I like pen. I use a lot more marker these days, I find, especially at shows. But yeah, I'm an old brush guy. I taught myself how to ink with a brush when I was a senior in high school, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made. But nowadays I do a lot of work digitally, and that comes out of my work in the video game industry. Almost everything there is digital. So I use Photoshop a lot, but I still can't get away from paper and pencil. So a lot of work I do now is hybrid. I'll do some sketching on paper, I'll scan, I'll do a lot of coloring and digital painting. But if I had to choose any one thing that I had to sit and do, it would probably be inking with a brush, because that's a lot of fun.
My favorite tools of the trade are my mechanical. I like an HB and 9mm lead. My blending stump. I usually have a brush, but I'm chaos. But these two, within my click eraser, I believe in starting with a pencil line first, then you progress to a darker pencil line, and then you progress to ink, and then you can add color and watercolor, scan it, and use paint, word, Photoshop. Pencil's the most important thing. Get a pencil and paper, and you're ready to go.
For me, my favorite tools are whatever's going to get the job done fastest and make it look like how I want it to look. I like to use various instruments like brush pens and steel nib pens for inking, mechanical pencils for basic drawing, and any sort of artboard that'll let me play around and not give me problems will be the best thing I like to use.
Let's see, I started out with, I'm an inker primarily, so I started out with these Croquill, like old-fashioned metal pins, dip in the ink like they did back in the old days. And then nowadays I've been using synthetic brushes. They're really cheap, they're disposable, they're great, they're fast. Yeah, I've been using a lot of those, Copic markers, things like that.
What are your favorite tools of the trade and why?
My favorite tools of the trade, I would have to fall always back to oil painting as like a real key love. But currently Photoshop, I work heavily in Photoshop, ZBrush. Yeah, basically those. I'll go to pencil and paper every now and then, but most of my creative work currently is in Photoshop.
I started using Copic markers, but since about 3 or 4 years ago, I've transitioned entirely to digital. I use a software called Paint Tool SAI, S-A-I. It's by far the most easy to use. It allows me to have full control over my media, and it's the cheapest out of all of the softwares as well. It's only about $50 for the whole usage.
Dr. Martin's liquid watercolors are probably my favorite thing of all time. I mean, I've had my box set, other than replacing all the turtle greens and some of the bandana colors, for about 30 years. It's lasted that long, so that's one of my favorite things. I love working with those. I love working with an airbrush. Unfortunately, most of the stuff now is on the computer.
My favorite tool of the trade was this really rare item called a pencil. And they don't really use those anymore. But we used to use actually a blue pencil to do the animation work. And then the assistant would clean it up in a nice dark pencil. But those things are kind of by the wayside. Now you're using styluses and tablets. And I don't like that as much. It used to be when you draw, you're watching your pencil. On a tablet, you're drawing over here and watching the screen to see where you're going. And it's really kind of weird. You can get used to it, but it's not as much fun. Yeah.
Well, Copic markers, I use quite a bit. They're very solid. These ones particularly have a metal body. The nibs are replaceable, and the interior cartridge can be refilled with ink. So you never really throw these away, you just make little replacements on them. There's multiple sizes, and the ink goes on pretty smoothly. Doesn't bleed at all, which is a very good feature for their ink. Signing markers, I use Sharpies, the metallic ones. Pretty much you can go find 3 colors and put them on anything. Black sometimes if it's a very light cover. Old school materials, never be without a French curve. And I use a lot of mechanical pencils. They're not even that expensive, they're the cheapy kinds.
I'm mostly a brush inker, which isn't done very much anymore. A lot of companies prefer either Croquill or digital inking, but I'm old school and I still prefer using a brush.
My favorite tools of the trade are my pencils and my computer and my Copic markers. It's always penciling, it's like I always loved penciling. It's what I went to college and my portfolio was actually just full of penciled comic book pages, and it's so weird to see that next to everyone else that has like finished colored paintings and and finished ad art and stuff, and here's this stuff that just looks incomplete. But there I was really trying to work on my storytelling ability, and for that I really didn't need to finish my work because I was really going for being a full-time penciler in the comic book world.
I'm not going to close yet, but you are watching Beyond Comic Panels. That's a wonderful title, and I am Mark Kistler. I'm Mark Kistler, and you're watching Beyond the Comic Panel. Did I get it right? All right. Thank you.
How and why did you get into the field?
Oh gosh, I've been a collector of comics for 35 years. I used to own a comic book store in the 90s, so comics have always been a part of my life. With the advent of social media and seeing how easy it is to reach out to other creators around the world, I felt that I needed to do something to help myself in the books that I have written, as well as other creators that are out there.
I pretty much grew up loving comic books. When I was younger, I was a pretty energetic kid, and which is code for kind of a pain in the rear for my mom. And she found that there were a couple of things that kept me quiet and manageable. One thing was if she gave me a pad of paper and had me draw, that kept me kind of quiet. The other thing is that she would buy me comic books from time to time, and she noticed that I just sort of sit in the corner and just read. And that was, I was fascinated by it. Just the art, the stories, I would read them over and over again. And she thought that was pretty interesting. And she thought it was helping me learn how to read too at an early age. The artwork just captivated me, and I used to draw my own comics when I was a little kid. I'd sell them to my friends for a dime, I mean, what was I thinking? But it was very inspirational. And by high school, I was trying to find out as much as I could about cartooning, professional cartooning. And luckily I had a teacher, Parnell Bach, that would help me. My Uncle Dick, who was also an illustrator and a cartoonist, gave me a lot of pointers. And then, of course, the Stan and John's How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way came out when I was in college. And I just thought that was a wealth of information, living here in flyover country. And I was just on a path. I went to the university and got a pretty good foundational instruction, and my background is in fine art, but I really wanted to do this, and luckily I got the chance.
I've known I wanted to be a professional artist since I was in first grade, and I started drawing. I started copying Fred Flintstone comic books, and I copied the Jetsons comic books. I used to copy and trace, and I got into high school and I copied and traced just about every Dr. Seuss book. My big hero, Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss, Bill Watterson, amazing artist. Trace, copy, study his books. That's right, I said trace. Trace. You trace your letters when you learn how to draw, when you had to write your name. Learn how to copy sentences so you know the proper structure. I traced, I copied, I practiced, and then you develop skill, you develop confidence. From the confidence comes your enthusiasm for practicing more. The more you practice, the better you get. The better you get, the more you want to practice. So I call it the self-perpetuating success wheel. And it all starts with practice. Practice is going to build skill, it's going to build enthusiasm, it's going to build confidence. And pretty soon you're going to have a really powerful drawing instinct. I call it the ice. You're going to be cool as ice because you'll have a drawing instinct, you'll have the creativity that comes with practice, and you'll have the drawing enthusiasm, okay? And I developed my skill from my favorite artists, Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel, Bill Watterson, Gary Larson, The Far Side, my teacher from when I was growing up, Mr. Goddard from high school, Mr. Bruce McIntyre from elementary school, amazing retired Disney artist who developed the original 7 elements of drawing that taught me, and then I expanded that to out of the 12 Renaissance works using his original 7 and building from that. but you pick your own favorite artist that you can use to build up your enthusiasm. You know, who do you admire? And copy and trace and practice and build your skill.
As a kid, comics were pretty much what taught me really to read, and I just voraciously devoured them, along with Saturday morning cartoons. And you know, I always loved drawing, and I was always drawing superheroes and scenes from Star Wars and everything out. And when I kind of found out that people actually do this and can get, you know, and then later that they actually got paid to draw comics, I just realized that this is something I wanted to do and pursued it. And my parents were actually very supportive and, you know, encouraged me to learn wherever I could from whoever I could. And, you know, I just worked my behind off and, you know, submitted samples and learned from whoever I could. And lucky enough that editors looked at my stuff, said, hey, we want to hire you, and went from there. And I've been lucky that I've worked with a lot of great people over the years.
Not for the money.
Not for the fame.
Not for the, no, not for the fame. No, I got it because it's what I always did with my free time. And it's what I always drew, and then somebody handed me a comic book at 12 and I said, oh, that's what I want to do. And so, other than when there's deadlines, I've never really felt like it's a job. I felt like it's something that I would have done for free, and that people pay me for is a bonus. The deadlines make it feel like a job sometimes, and the travel. Other than that, it's pretty awesome.
How and why did you get into this field?
I was an artist, and I loved, you know, I knew in an early age, like probably grade school, that I needed to be an artist. And through middle school, I had realized, no, there's this thing called illustration out there that really like drove me. Comic books were a big love. So yeah, I really just kept finding ways to use my art to keep making money and keep going down the path of being an artist.
Because I love it. I love anime, I like drawing, and I am a dork who likes to draw in my room and watch anime. So eventually I got good at it.
Because I knew Kevin Eastman is basically, I actually wanted to do animation, more Warner Brothers, or work for Mad Magazine, and Kevin Eastman and I went to high school together, and we used to kind of trade art back and forth. And when him and Pete formed the Turtles, he asked me to do the lettering, like I said earlier, and that's how I got in. It's who you know.
I was a bus driver in Los Angeles, and I took a class in comic book art, and the teacher worked at Hanna-Barbera. And he liked my artwork and suggested I get a job, or I take a class at Hanna-Barbera that he could recommend me for, and that's how I got hired. So I never thought I'd ever be in the business. It just kind of happened to me, and kind of like changed my life a bit.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
And it kind of shows that it's not necessarily all the time what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah, it really is. Because I mean, if I had never met the guy, I'd still be a bus driver.
Right.
So, well, I'd be retired.
I was always an artist as a little kid, and I initially wanted to be an artist for Mad Magazine and do cartooning and satirical takeoffs on things. That was the first thing that I fell in love with as a young kid, and my older cousins had them lying around, and I started reading them and started trying to emulate the art from them. As I got older, I did watch a lot of cartoon superheroes back in the 60s when I was younger. Didn't really get into drawing them that much back then, though. It wasn't until the 70s, when I was a teenager, that I really fell in love with the Marvel Comics and the stories and the mythology that was going on in there. And that's when I started trying to draw comics. Also a thing that spurred me was the success of a lot of movies and television shows having to do with comic books at that time. I felt it seemed like an exciting area to go into, and as I was getting ready to enter college, and I was starting to really think about a career, and I was beginning to think that maybe it was a possibility that I could do comics for a living at that point. How I got into comics was while I was finishing up high school and getting ready to go to college, I met a comic book owner, a comic book store owner, who I became friends with. He was not much older than me, and he had inherited from his dad. He was a comic book lover and an artist himself. He did a lot of inking, and he also had a newsletter through the comic book store where a lot of local artists would do a drawing or two, and then he would publish that and have it available for people to take in who came in to buy comics. I thought that was pretty cool, so I asked him if I could do one, and I started doing 1 or 2 every month. And then also in the meantime, while working for him at the comic store, I eventually started going to flea markets and Comic Cons with him to sell comic books. I started showing some of my artwork to the professional artists and editors who were attending the shows, and I would do this at different shows for a couple of years, getting a lot of feedback and trying to improve my work, until one show I went to, I met Luke McDonald, who at the time was the penciler for Iron Man. He liked my work enough that he brought me in to see Jim Shooter, who was the editor-in-chief at Marvel at the time, and I got an interview with him. I learned quite a bit about his philosophy on comics and what he expected from his artists. I got a tryout story and took it home. A couple weeks later I sent it in. They liked it, but they still said it needed work, so I got another tryout story. That also he turned in probably about 2 months later. I was going to school at the same time, so I took some time with it. They liked that to the point where John Romita, who was the art director, the senior art director of Marvel at the time, invited me to come on board as what was called a Romita's Raider at the time. They were art apprentices, and they worked with John in a department at Marvel's offices. And I came on board as the 3rd Romita Raider, and I worked the summer of 1984 between my last 2 semesters of school, or college that is, and I moved to New York for the summer, worked there for 3 months and up in the offices, did a lot of corrections and did changes on if stories needed to be changed. Back then there were no computers, so our job was to make corrections, get them to the editor so they could get out to the printer before they missed their deadline. Things had to be fixed. I did enough work that I got an offer from Denny O'Neil, who's the editor of Hulk and Sectors and a bunch of other titles at that time. One of them was Power Man Iron Fist, and the artist on Power Man Iron Fist came up ill and couldn't finish the book. So I got 6 pages to do over a weekend to try to get it out the next week when they had to meet their deadline. So I took it home and I did 6 pencils over the weekend. About a semester later, after I graduated in January, I was offered a job doing Sectors, which was a toy book, a bi-monthly toy book, and that's how I broke in. That was my first real paid job with Marvel, and my full book, that first one I did.
I used to paint, and I really enjoyed it, but I was very unoriginal, so I was actually a better forger than I was a painter, and I would do it just for simply the love of it. Obviously forging is illegal, so I would just paint the things I loved and I would give them away. And one of my favorite subjects was I was crazy about ElfQuest. So I painted quite a few ElfQuest pieces and I gave them away to friends. And one of those friends showed one of those pieces to the Peonies, Warp Graphics, and they hired me to do the backdrop painting for one of their convention booths. During the course of doing this convention piece, I looked at Wendy's work and I said, I can do this. I can take my brushes, I could ink comic books. And I practiced for a year. I went out to San Diego and I did everything wrong. I took everything in the portfolio that you're not supposed to, and I just got shredded. But I learned a lot of good things while I was there. I went to seminars, I talked to people, went home, practiced for another year, came back the next year and got a job.
Well, let's start out with why. Why is a better question. Why would you enter comics? You would enter comics because you love comics and you love story and you love characters. And I loved all of that. And reading and growing up with comics from a very early age, and then like picking it up again in junior high and high school. I think it just clicked, you know. It's like wow, this is something so cool that it's like I want to help create stuff in this universe. So that's the why. But then the how you get into it is another story. It's you don't even have to be like professionally trained, but what you should do is you should be dedicated to it. You know, so you want to be drawing every day. You know, you want to be working on your figures, working on your backgrounds, working on, you know, how you break something down into shapes, and then you can build that up in your own head, and then you figure out how things work. And then it's like, then not only that, but you also have to learn how to tell a story as well, especially with on the page when you're telling a story with panels and everything. You have to start thinking about your composition of the page layout and everything, and then within that, then you also have you have your panels, which then it's like okay, now I have to be the cinematographer, you know. So now you have to start learning about maybe movie making and stuff like that. So it's a lot of learning and it's a lot of work, but you know, when it all comes together, it just pays off so much. For me, I was in the right after college. I actually was kind of doing my own thing. I was just kept making sample pages and stuff like that. But eventually, I got a big break with DC Comics on their book Legionnaires, which I did a fill-in issue for, and then I did some subsequent work on the annuals in 1993, and then and eventually I got to do the main title, you know, and so that was a big move for me. So that was my big break. And how I got that was it was a lot of meeting other artists, talking to editors and stuff like that. They give you feedback, and then eventually if they think that you're good enough, then they'll give you a shot. So that's really all it takes, really. I guess you got to get lucky too, I guess.
Hi, you are watching Beyond the Comics Panels. Hi, you are watching Beyond the Comic Panels.
Who are your inspirations?
Without a doubt, Jim Shooter. In fact, I had the opportunity to meet him in Philadelphia in April this year, and I told him that he was the one who drove me to start Insane Comics.
At an early age, I was a Batman fan. Never really was a Superman fan, but Batman got my attention. The new look Batman, when Carmine Infantino redesigned the character, I really loved that. And then, of course, after that, Neil Adams. And when Neil Adams took over doing Batman, I was just totally blown away, as was everybody else. And then he did Deadman, and he did the Spectre. All of a sudden, his stuff was everywhere at DC, and it was so different, so illustrative and commercial art looking, and it really grabbed my attention. But of course, earlier than that, I was reading Marvels, and it was Stan's stories and the way he treated the characters, and of course Jack Kirby and his incredible imagination. And I was just buying everything I could find. If I could scrape up, even if I could scrape up 50 cents, you could go down to the store and buy several comics. 12 cents a pop. It was great. If you had $1, you could come away with a stack of comics and read them till the covers fell off. So, it was Kirby very early on. John Romita Sr., I loved Spider-Man. Of course, Ditko, but Ditko was a little bit before I was collecting. I kind of came to Ditko after that. And then later on, I mentioned Neil Adams, but the other guy that really blew my socks off was Jim Steranko. When he took over doing Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., which was a book that I bought, Strange Tales, mostly for Doctor Strange. I didn't really care for Nick Fury that much. When Steranko took over, that became basically my visual drug of choice, because Steranko's stuff just got better and better and better, and his graphic storytelling style was just so visually inspiring that, like I said, that became my go-to comic for years, and I studied it, and I thought, I want to do this someday. And then even after that, when he became an illustrator, he was doing paperback covers, like the Shadow covers. That stuff just knocked my socks off, too. So that within comics, those were the biggies for me. And there were so many more, I could go on and on, but those are the big ones. But of course, in illustration, a couple of names, James Bama doing the Doc Savage covers, that was always a real draw. Frank Frazetta. I mean, everybody in my generation who's done illustration, who's been lucky enough to do paperback cover illustration, that's sort of their inspirational, big bang. was Frazetta. He was so far and away ahead of everybody else in the industry. And we all kind of looked to him as an inspirational godfather, right? So, of course, his Conan covers grabbed me at an early age. And I was hooked from then on. Everything he did, I'd have to buy. Whether I cared about the story inside the book or not, I had to buy the paperback. But there was one book that came out in 1967, I think. It was one of 2 Marvel novels. This was called The Great Gold Steal, and it was about Captain America. It was written by Ted White, but it had a cover on it of Captain America. It was an old commercial art style gouache painting of a very realistic looking Captain America. When I saw that, I was just totally captivated. I couldn't look away from it. I bought it, I studied it, I told my mom, I want to do this someday. And for years I tried to find out who the artist was. It was Mitchell Hooks, who was a very well-known illustrator, movie poster illustrator, and paperback book cover illustrator, but he didn't sign it. And so a lot of us who were very inspired by that image spent years trying to track down the artist. But that one illustration, as much as all of the others, really propelled me. I thought I'd never seen a realistic depiction of a superhero like that before, and I thought, that's it. This is what I got to do for a living someday. And luckily, I got to do it.
Comic-wise, I think there's just a ton of them out there. I've been lucky enough to have worked with a lot of great guys in comics, but I'm a big fan of a lot of the older artists. Wally Wood is one of my favorites, Al Williamson, and a lot of modern guys too. Dave Gibbons, Nestor Redondo, Bernie Wrightson, all have just been in little ways here and there just big inspiration for me. Jack Kirby, but pretty much there's so many of them out there that I think I get a little bit of something from all of them. But it's just just watching these guys create and seeing what they can do with a pencil and a piece of paper is just amazing.
Back when I was a kid, when I would see guys like Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee, those guys were just amazingly, the detail that they would put on things, the spin they would put on established characters was amazing. I remember I really liked Dave Sim back in the day because he did 30 years straight of one character, came out every month, and I thought that was amazing. But seeing these guys who maybe started off as just pencilers or artists and then they became publishers, I thought that was amazing. Of course, Neil Adams, Brian Boland, Kevin Nolan, all those guys are great too.
Who are your inspirations?
Oh, my inspirations. I'm kind of a lover of most arts, but high and low, I love everything from Will Eisner all the way to Rembrandt. So that's a toughie. I know that Frank Frazetta had a huge impact on me as a teen. Neil Adams' work was beautiful in comics. John Singer Sargent, his portraiture work, through his career was, just a fabulous source of influence. Loved the brushwork, all that. So, I mean, really, there's a little bit of everybody in me on some level.
A lot of Japanese artists whose names I can't read because I can't read Japanese. I like a lot of visual novels, so I'll like the art from those. There's an artist named Kazuki Yone who does the artwork for Hakuoki. Her art is absolutely beautiful. I have a few art books from her, and a lot of people, just a ton of them on the internet, because that's how all the media transfers nowadays. So.
Again, I'm going to probably go back to Mad Magazine with this. Don Martin was probably the one guy in the world that I wanted to be. I loved Foyt, Poit, all the sound effects of the Don when somebody was doing something. Him and Sergio Aragonés were probably my 2 major people that I wanted to be.
That's an easy one. I was about 8 years old when Marvel Comics came out. So my inspirations were, first and foremost, Steve Ditko, because I love Spider-Man, and then of course Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, because that whole era changed comic books. It went from DC, which was kind of all just imaginary stories, and all of a sudden it got very realistic with Spider-Man, and relating to Peter Parker, because he was kind of a shy kid, so was I. So I really related to Peter Parker.
I was fortunate to actually work with 2 of my greatest inspirations. One of them was John Romita Sr. He was one of my favorite Spider-Man artists, and he was also one of my favorite girl artists. He drew beautiful women, and I still to this day try to emulate his ability to, he's effortless at creating beautiful women and different looking women too. Not always just not cookie cutters. They each had their own personality, and he created a multitude of them over the years. And so he was definitely a big inspiration on me with Spider-Man and his women. Neil Adams, I had a chance to work with him at Continuity for 2 years, and he was a huge influence on my artwork. He, to me, was the guy who most captured realism in his work, but also was able to exaggerate it to make it exciting and otherworldly, like a comic book. So I set my sights on trying to emulate him as much as I could in my professional career. And then when I got a chance to actually work with him for 2 years, learned so much about every aspect of comic book making. So that was fantastic. Also, John Buscema, who was the artist on Marvel, Draw the Marvel Way, which was a Bible for me growing up. Gil Kane was a big inspiration. Bernie Wrightson, who just passed, huge artistic inspiration on me. Many others, probably too countless to name here, but very much about a lot of artists and their styles and how much they do. Oh, one last one I got to get in, Wally Wood. He was a big artist at Mad in the early days when I wanted to do work as well as doing comics and Daredevil and Marvel.
Well, obviously, Wendy Pini was a huge inspiration. Her artwork just inspired me to want to get into the comics trade. And then once I was out in San Diego, like I said, I went to seminars. I went to a seminar by Dick Giordano, and he was absolutely magnificent. I learned so much from him. So I'd have to say that he was one of my biggest inspirations.
All my inspirations come from comics themselves, the comics that I've read. But then once I started working towards getting into comics, it's like there were, early on it was John Byrne. John Byrne was a big one, just his storytelling and the way he drew characters I really loved. Then it was Adam Hughes. And Adam Hughes, I was trying to draw like Adam Hughes for a long time, but gave up on that dream. So then having an Adam Hughes influence and watching a lot of anime and manga at the time, that kind of started creating my own style. So my style is like really an amalgam of Adam Hughes and anime, because the Adam Hughes stuff comes in kind of the natural realism that Adam Hughes does, and the manga and anime actually kind of comes in where it's like I'm able to kind of get the characters into like body poses and it's like their bodies kind of expressing emotion. Because when we were watching anime back then, they had no subtitles, so you're really focused on their tone of voice and and their facial expressions and just the way they stood or the way they walked and stuff like that. So for me, it's like those are the big two.
That's the last line right there, just to say to the camera.
I'm James Munch, and you're watching Beyond the Comic Panels. All right. I'm James Munch, and you are watching Beyond the Comic Panels.
Perfect.
You're recording right now, right? Yeah. Is there any light? There's no light. What's my range here? How far can I go on?
You're good there.
All right. Good.
9 and on. And keep going, keep going, keep going.
Oh, okay. No, I'm not gonna. Gonna wander. Oh, hi there. You're watching Beyond the Comic Panels. I'm Jeff Moy, and continue watching.
What has been your most proud moment in your field?
Again, I'd have to refer back to Jim Shooter. Jim Shooter spent about 20 minutes in our booth in Philadelphia, had said that we had some great stuff that we're presenting, and he'd look forward to hearing more about us as we grow.
When I look back, I mean, having my first comic work published, I mean, the Badger #1, I was pretty proud of that, but it's sort of pride in like your baby pictures, you know? I mean, it was very early on. I don't think I really knew what I was doing yet, but it was great to be involved in the industry and getting published. Probably the most fun that I had drawing comics, and I had a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, but the project I had the most fun with, I think, was a 4-issue miniseries called The Sting of the Green Hornet that I did with Ron Fortier, and that 4 issues is it's an homage to the old movie serials, old Golden Age comic characters, and it takes place during World War II, and I got the chance to plot the story. I came up with the story idea. Ron took it and ran with it, created a great script, and then I got to pencil and ink. All except for the 4th issue, Dave Mowry inked for me because I was falling a little bit behind on it. But I got to pencil and ink and paint all of the covers. So that was a real great project, and I had a blast doing it.
That's a tough one. I've been doing this quite a while, but I think being able to, work on books with characters that I've loved as a kid, be able to say, wow, I love Spider-Man. It's like, and here I am drawing Spider-Man, or Nova, or drawing Superman. But I think my proudest thing right now is my creator-owned book, Ghoul Scouts. It's just a throwback to a lot of stuff I loved growing up. I have a great creative partner in Steve Bryant, and people really like the book, and I think it's something I enjoy doing. And every day I can draw this group of kids is a good day.
Actually, I have several proud moments. When I was 18, I got to work for Image Comics. I thought that was cool. I felt like a slacker because I found out that Joe Mad and Rob Liefeld were working at a younger age. I was like, oh man, I got to catch up. So that was cool. I got to work for Marvel at 23. That was cool. I got to work with Stan Lee a few times. That was definitely a highlight. Got to work on Transformers, a big thing I was a big fan of as a kid. Transformers for Hasbro, G.I. Joe for Hasbro, Godzilla. I got to work on Ninja Turtles for Mirage. That was pretty cool.
What has been your most proud moment?
Well, other than the kids, my wife, the family, all that, yes, my most proud moment would be I really enjoyed working on the Wolverine, the X-Men Origins Wolverine game, which was the movie tie-in game. We had a great team. The production on it was really smooth. It was just a really fantastic experience around the block. So as far as something that just jumps out to me in the gaming field, yeah, that was a wonderful experience.
A few months back, I found my book that I wrote in Kinokuniya Bookstore. Kinokuniya Bookstore is a Japanese-owned, Japanese-only bookstore. So they have a tiny little section that actually also carries a few choice American manga, how to draw manga books. So I was stupid happy. No one else was there. No one else knew what happened, and I didn't freak out. I was just taking pictures of a bookshelf in a store because I'm a dork. But it made me feel really happy because Kinokuniya has always been my favorite bookstore because it's all Japanese stuff and it's only anime and it's the real stuff. And to see my book there was made me very proud of what I had done.
Wow, it's hard to be proud. It's funny. I think probably seeing the very first, even though it was just a lettering, the very first book that I worked on sitting on a comic book shelf. Just kind of seeing it there and going, hey, my name's in there.
I've had many. but I think the one that really made me feel the best is I had done a movie called Stay Tuned. And Stay Tuned was Pam Dauber and John Ritter. It was a live action film, but there was a little 4-minute, 5-minute cartoon in the middle done by Chuck Jones. And they sent me the work through the mail, so I just FedExed it back and forth. But they liked my work so much that he called me up and asked me if I'd like to head their assistant animation group. And I kind of said, well, I don't think you realize I'm in Seattle. So if I come to meet you for lunch tomorrow, I've got to fly to LA. And he said, oh man, we need you in LA. And I said, you know, I've already moved out of LA. I can't move back. But it was very nice to have Chuck Jones want me to, because he's one of the classic Warner Brothers animators and directors. So that was a pretty proud moment right there.
I would say getting asked to do Spider-Man was probably one of my proudest moments. He was one of my favorite characters as a kid, and then as a teenager, I really got into Spider-Man and loved the character. So when I was given the opportunity to work on Spider-Man, it was a thrill for me, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Let's see, probably also doing a couple breakthrough issues on The Punisher, which I think I have available here to me. This cover here was the first to feature The Punisher actually having a skull as his face. Yeah, I've used the skull many times in different ways. This was the first time someone actually made his face out to look like a skull. And this was like a gimmicky time in comics. We used foil on it, embossing, and glow-in-the-dark white. So when I was given the opportunity to be the Marvel art director, another big thrill for me, and I was very proud of, and worked directly with John Romita as his assistant a few years later after I came back to Marvel offices to work on staff. This was one of the covers that we created there. Then I did all the pencil, ink, and the coloring, and came up with the concept for the face and the glow-in-the-dark paint. And if you want to, let's see if I can bring this up here. This cover here was actually the first cover at Marvel to feature red blood on the cover ever. Until that time, blood had always been represented just with black and kind of a splatter manner. And this was the first time they allowed actual red blood to appear. It was very subtle and not very prominent, but yet it was still the first time.
When I started inking in 1989, there were a lot of good women artists in the industry, but women inking superheroes was incredibly rare, especially for DC or Marvel. There really weren't hardly any, if any, women inkers doing superheroes, and I was one of the first ones. And that may have opened up other doors, I don't know, but I think it was a glass ceiling that I was definitely pushing on. There's a lot of wonderful, wonderful artists out there who broke ground for me, but I spent 10 years inking superheroes, and I think that's something to be proud of.
Probably was when I got the job to do become the regular penciler on Legionnaires. It was a book that I loved at the time, with Chris Sprouse and Carl Story doing the art, the Beerbaums doing the writing, and they were really characters that I actually grew up with, reading my father's comics and my uncle's comics back when I was a kid. So to get to play in that universe, I think, and help create those stories, I think was probably my proudest moment.
Hi everybody, I'm Mark Stegbauer and you're watching Beyond the Comic Panels.
Why don't we do one more take?
Yep. Hi, I'm Mark Stegbauer and you're watching Beyond the Comic Panels.
Perfect. What's been your most frustrating moment?
The most frustrating moment is working with creators who have extreme expectations, but that has been subsided a little bit, and I think they're more in line and attuned to what the business goals of Insane Comics are and have the realization of what to expect.
The one that jumps out at me, though, it's kind of humorous, really, in a way. But I drew the first couple of issues of the adaptation of The Lost World, Jurassic Park, for Topps Comics when that movie came out. And I think one of the reasons they hired me was because I could do likenesses over the course of a comic book story. And I used to have fun with that. And I had to draw characters like Vince Vaughn and Jeff Goldblum. And I had tried really hard to capture their likenesses as best as I could. So I thought I nailed Jeff Goldblum pretty well. When the comic came out, I got my comp copies in the mail, and I opened them up, and I noticed that somebody had gone back and drawn a makeshift mustache on all of the images of Jeff Goldblum. And I was just like, and some of them didn't look very good. And I was like, what happened here? And I called my editor and asked what happened. And she said, well, didn't you hear? And I said, no. She said, well, we had to fix all of those in the office because apparently Jeff Goldblum had a contract that said that he'd have to be compensated for any ancillary use of his likeness. And they weren't aware of that at the time, and they couldn't afford to send him a separate check for all of this. So they had to alter his look in the comics, and they did so by drawing these little awful mustaches on the pages. So that was kind of frustrating after all the work of trying to get the likeness. But it is, looking back at it, is kind of funny too.
I think a lot of times frustration comes especially when, especially if you're doing something. When I was an inker for so many years, and a lot of people, don't understand or sometimes even appreciate what an inker can do and what they bring to the table when they're working with a penciler, how they really add to the artwork. And it's not just tracing, and that they're the ones that you see on the final page. It's what they do is the final product, apart from the colorist, and they can make or break a book. And I think more people are starting to understand that, but still it's a longer process of people really seeing that and coming to appreciate it.
I actually had some success early on in my career, and then after about 8 or 10 years I started working with companies that were slow to pay or just flat out didn't pay. And some of them are still around. So that's frustrating. Every time I see that they're still around and that they still owe me money, that's been frustrating. The people, though, by and large, have been great.
What's been your most frustrating moment?
I worked in comic books for a number of years, and I loved working in comics, but the deadlines were just a grind, and it was always whatever you could put into it was as good as you were. I remember 72-hour working days where at the end I was like 2 inches away from my page, and my eyes were so blurry I'd see double vision vertically, and the stoplights were double red, double green, that was stuff like that. Just, frustration of grinding it out.
Conventions frustrate me sometimes just because they're long hours. Probably sometime when I was fighting with a suitcase, pulling it through a parking lot or something to that extent. Not a ton of frustration from the external part of you. A lot of it is just something that you feel inside. So if you can't get a hand right and you've been fighting with it for 5 hours, that's the main frustration that it feels.
I don't know, because I always feel like we always challenge. You had a new challenge, because we were learning on the job a lot of the time. So I really, it's hard to pick one because there's probably so many, but it was kind of the way we learned. I always say, and I know this is going to sound bad, but I'm kind of an art whore. I say yes first to the money and then figure it out if I can do it. Right. So, I think it's just every new challenge is a new challenge, so it's hard. I think everything is kind of moving forward.
On the other side, what's been your most frustrating moment?
Oh, well, that's also really easy. The frustrating moment is getting hired at Hanna-Barbera when there was Hanna-Barbera, DePatie Freeling, Ruby Spears, Rankin and Bass, Filmation, all these different studios to work at. And within 3 years, every studio sent the work to Japan and Korea, except Filmation. Thank goodness for Lou Scheimer, because he kept us working, and I got about another 6 or 7 years out of that. And then I ended up working at a place called Bear Animation, B-A-E-R. He was an animator at Disney and started his own company. And that's when I got to work on Roger Rabbit and Prince and the Pauper, some pretty high-end Disney stuff. And but yeah, when they sent the work overseas to Japan and Korea, that just broke our hearts and really destroyed the animation industry for the United States.
Probably the mid-90s, I felt a little frustrated up at Marvel. Things were getting, in my opinion, very corporate. A lot of speculators had come into the comic industry, and maybe the gimmicks were starting to get out of control, and I may be partially to blame for that myself. So I can't be too upset at that part, but I think maybe also the comics had started, the comics I loved early on in the 80s that really inspired me were very groundbreaking, and I thought maybe Marvel was getting a little too safe for a while at that point, because that was a little frustrating for me. Then I went to work for Penthouse Comics and lost the editor-in-chief who had taken his own life. That was a tough time for me. Not necessarily frustrating, but sad, and it cut short what could have been a really good time working at a place at that time which was very cutting edge for comics.
I would have to say ageism. I think the comics industry will tell you that there isn't really age discrimination. I would say that is incorrect. I know I'm not the only one that talks about this. There's a large pool of other creators out there, like myself, who feel that as they've aged, they've been pushed out of the industry. And the thing is, we've got a lot of talent, we've got a lot of experience behind us. We know what we're doing, we've got a good reputation, and yet we're being slighted, we're being shoved aside so that young, hot talent can come in and maybe make a few more bucks for the industry. And we're workhorses. We've turned out the product. I never missed a deadline in 10 years that I worked steadily from 1989 to 2000, actually 11 years. I worked every single day in the comics industry. I never missed a single deadline. I had almost 200 books, almost 4,000 pages, never missed a deadline. And yet, at the end of that period, it was harder and harder to find work. As the year 2000 rolled around, I got less and less work, and finally I just kind of dropped out for a while because I wasn't able to find work anymore. And at some point I came back and I found that I wasn't the only one talking about this. I wasn't the only one in my old group of friends who were saying, we can't find work anymore. We worked for years as comics pros and now we can't find any work anymore. So we just decided to start doing our own comics. And more I find that my old contemporaries are self-publishing because that's the only avenue that we have left to us. We just said, screw it, we'll just do our own.
And how are they doing self-publishing?
A lot of people are doing very, very well. The good thing about it is that if, say for instance, we do Kickstarter. I've done 2 successful Kickstarters this year. The good thing about that is we've already got a good reputation. We've already got a body of work behind us. So people know that we're going to give them a good quality product.
Drawing animals is the probably the worst for me. Anything else I could pretty much draw, but even animals, it's like once you start breaking down their components and their skeletal structure and kind of realize, well, you know, it's like they kind of have some animals, you know, it's like they have a skeletal structure like humans, they're just in different proportions. Then once your mind is wrapped around that, then you can just like push forward and make it look half decent, you know, and then get past it.
In the camera? Okay. I'm Jeff Butler, and you're watching Beyond the Comic Panels. Is that right? Did I do that right? I'm Jeff Butler, and you're watching Beyond the Comic Panels.
What would you tell up-and-coming artists and writers to try to avoid?
For writers, try to avoid the lack of words, the lack of narratives in a story. You have to have stories. It can't just be pages of art. There has to be narratives, there has to be words in the stories. For artists, do your thing. Be proud of what you do, push that. Don't bend to what others say. You are creating something unique, and eventually the story will be told through your art as well.
Well, I do tell my students that copying other people's work can be valuable as a tool to grow. I mean, sometimes it can be a good tool to try to solve problems that other people have already solved and learn how they went about coming up with those creative solutions. What I try to tell students is don't get too comfortable copying. You know, where it can be helpful, there's always a line where you have to stop and you have to incorporate what you've learned into your own style or developing style. Some people have a hard time doing that. Some people are so tied to their influences that that's all they do is continue to copy that influence. I think that if you do that, you start to become a little stale, because as the old saying goes, it's far better to be yourself than a cheap imitation of somebody else. So, but I always, like I say, I caution, because in the old atelier style of, or master apprentice style of learning art, copying was viewed as a very valuable tool. Again, to a point. You know, when it stops being a learning tool and starts to be a crutch, then it's no longer helpful. But I think influences are great. We need influences. And I just caution a lot of artists, don't be so caught up with your influence that you lose your own work in the style of your influence.
Avoid perfectionism. You're going to make mistakes. Give yourself permission to fail. You're going to fail. I have almost 1 million books in print, and you know how many publishers turned down and here's my most recent book, okay? And this book. You know how many times, okay, my first book came out, and I had, I don't know, 500,000 in pop print or something. I had 13 publishers turn down my next one. And every book I had to resubmit, and I've had failed rejection letters even after I was published. So give yourself permission for rejection, for failure. That's a step closer to the yes. That's a step closer to being successful. All right, so failure is incredibly important to success. You have to fail and fail and fail. Keep trying, be relentless, never give up. Okay, don't accept mediocrity. You're an amazing, brilliant person. And you have a lot to share with the world through your imagination. Believe in yourself and you will prevail, okay? Don't give up. You gotta hold those dreams tight. And you gotta work your bula off, all right? This generation that's probably watching this, you guys, you have to work really hard. It's not going to drop in your lap. You're not going to start out at $80,000 a year out of high school. You're going to have to work and work and work, and it's fun. That's the fun of it. You get to learn, okay, and you get to practice. So that's what I would suggest about, you know, what to avoid is being worried about failure. Give yourself permission to fail, and give yourself permission to make mistakes and learn from them and build better.
Try to get as much as you can in writing. Especially when it comes to monetary compensation. Especially don't ever work for exposure. You know, you're doing what you're doing is a job, just like a plumber or a doctor or a pilot. It's a different kind of job, but what you do has worth, and exposure is not payment. I have people to this day say, hey, would you like to work on this? It would be great exposure. It's like, I've been doing this 25 years. I haven't had enough exposure. I think I should get paid for what I'm doing. And that's probably the most important thing, is like your worth has value, your art has worth.
I see a lot of up-and-coming artists, and what it seems like I see a lot of is them making excuses whenever they show their artwork. And if it's artwork you have to make excuses for, don't show it. And if it's something that's half finished, finish it. That's the thing I would say more than anything. Failed writers don't finish their stories. Failed artists don't finish their artwork. So finish it. And whatever you do, the next one's gonna be better.
What would you tell up-and-coming artists to try to avoid?
What to try to avoid?
Like a cautionary tale.
I think it would be to be blind to your weaknesses, you know, like really keep it open, and when people criticize you, don't get really defensive right off. You know, count to 10, don't get defensive. Try to learn from what they're saying, because there's a message in there. And, you know, you can be your own artist, that's great, and, you know, you can work in a box, but really if you're trying to communicate to others, you really should be listening as well as, you know, talking. So I think that's, keep it open.
Don't draw for money, and don't draw for other people. Draw for yourself. Don't draw for fame. It's never going to make you happy. It won't give you what you want. So don't draw characters that you don't like just because you think it'll make you popular on the internet or because you think it'll sell. It usually will end up giving you neither, and it'll make you unhappy. So if you end up just drawing what you love, people can tell in your artwork that you really loved drawing something, and they can tell like that they want to buy it more because you put more detail, more effort, and they can tell there's just like beautiful strokes in it that you enjoyed. So do that.
I'm probably not the best guy because I didn't have a lot of falls along the way. I kind of stepped into an existing thing. I guess, you know, the hardest thing is to avoid is working for free. You know, a lot of people say that you got to kind of, well, this is how you earn, and it's not true. You know, that's not the case. That's somebody trying to get you to do something for free and hopefully get paid on the back end, and that doesn't usually turn out well 90% of the time. Sometimes it does, but not all the time. And on the opposite end of that, I always tell people that are just starting out and they can't get stuff out there, I say go to a nonprofit that may need a piece of art for a t-shirt or something. You build your portfolio that way, and it's a good thing as opposed to, you know, just hoping, you know, that's going to happen. So
try to avoid the animation industry. No, we always tell people when they come up and they say, my kid wants to be an animator, what's your, you know, what can he do? And we always answer, go to law school, because then at least you'll have a job. Because there's really no work in animation anymore, so unless you're maybe storyboard or layout, but most of that stuff's all done overseas or digitally, yeah.
Getting upset at people if they're looking at your work and they have something critical to say about it, take it as a lesson and use it to learn from and to get better at your craft. If you take personal affront to a professional at a show taking their time out to look at your work, don't argue with them. Listen to what they have to say. If you don't agree, that's fine. You don't have to agree. You don't have to incorporate their advice. But arguing with them about your work, saying this is why you did something when they're telling you maybe there was a better way, avoid that if you can at all costs. That's not a good look really for anyone.
Don't step on the people under you on your way up. The more you rise, remember where you came from. Don't step on the little guy on the way up, because you're going to come back down sooner or later. And then you're going to have burned your bridges. So be kind. Be kind to each other.
Try avoiding working for free on spec. You know, there's projects out there that if you have a real passion for, you know, it's like you can work on it with someone else, but that's I would really suggest that it's something that you have a creative stake in and a monetary stake in as well. Without that, then it's just kind of I don't want to say people are taking advantage of you, but people are taking advantage of you. What else would you avoid in the industry?
Is that something that comes easily in the industry, being taken advantage of?
It could. You know, it could be abused. But I mean, in this industry, it's like there's a lot of things that it's like you are creating for free. It's like a lot of characters that you create for the major companies and stuff like that. It's like you don't have necessarily, you know, you put in the work into creating them, their look and whatever, but you're not actually really paid for that, because that's kind of included in the fee that you're paid for per page. So I would say, yeah, that might be something. There's really nothing you can do about it. So you know, you can't really avoid that if you want to work for the big companies.
I'm Nick Scholes, and you're watching Beyond the Comic Panels.
I'm Samantha Gorell, and you're watching Beyond the Comic Panels.
What positive suggestions do you have for up-and-coming artists and writers?
It's going to be frustrating. When you're submitting to publishing companies, you're probably going to get turned down on quite a few of them. Take the suggestions. If they don't give suggestions, ask them. And more than often than not, they're willing to provide suggestions on what you can do to improve.
Again, I tell all my students to be able to draw everything. Learn how to draw everything convincingly. Learn how to draw the human figure. Learn human anatomy. Take a lot of life drawing. You'll hear every artist will always say the same thing. The human body is one of the most complex forms to draw because it's complex at its base, but then it moves, it becomes so dynamic. And drawing that convincingly is a lot harder than people realize. So I say, listen, draw from life, draw from reference, draw things that you don't necessarily want to draw. I have students that all they want to draw are furries, all they want to draw is animated. That's fine, but it's pigeonholing your talent. You know, learn how to draw everything well so that when you go back to that style of drawing, it's even better. And that's the thing that it sort of goes back to what I said before about your influences. If you get too caught up in that, you limit yourself. And so yeah, just draw everything really well, and don't, especially for young cartoonists and comic artists, people forget that the best cartoonists are people that draw really well. And it's because they've learned how to draw the world, and now they can cartoon the world convincingly. And that's something that a lot of young artists don't realize. They think cartooning is simple, it's easy. Those two things don't mean the same thing. Simple is a far cry from easy, and sometimes simple can be very hard. To do simple really well can be a very difficult task. So it's really, what it gets down to is concentrating on the fundamentals and getting good at it. A lot of people want to shortcut through the hard part. And the hard part is actually doing your due diligence to get better at the fundamentals of art.
Build relationships with art schools, with San Jose State University, who has a powerful animation, with Chicago School of Art and Science, with Otis Parsons, with Art Center of Design, with all these wonderful art colleges around the United States and in Canada. Email them, develop relationships with the staff. Email your favorite artist. Artists love to share their enthusiasm and their passion for you young artists. Okay, so build relationships in the industry you want to be in. Send them emails, set up phone interviews. Talk to them. Most of them are very accessible. You just have to make the effort. You got to kind of find them, right? Just send them an email to their website, and eventually and don't just send one email. Okay, send one a week for a couple months, and eventually these guys don't give up. If you want to talk to the comic artist from the comic strips, or someone who's very famous with web comics, make the effort and don't give up. And I am 90% sure that you'll be able to get in touch with them. Okay, so you build up. You got to have your heroes. You got to have your role models, and keep you inspired to shoot for that. Right, kind of raise that level of expectation.
No matter what you want to do in comics, learn how to do it all. Learn about how lettering works. Learn how colorists do their job. Learn about inking. Learn about writing. Learn about the publishing side of it. You don't necessarily have to do it professionally and say, well, I have to do this, I have to do this, but talk to other creators who do those things and pick their brain and get information from them, and just learn what they do and why they do it and why they have the passion for what they're doing. Because people do lettering for a reason, because they love that part of the artwork. People do coloring for a reason, because they like that. It's the same, but learn all you can from everybody you can, and also show your work to whoever can look at it for you, and you'll earn great tips and you'll make a lot of friends.
What positive suggestion do you have for up-and-coming artists?
I think I might have answered that, but basically just to finish things If you find yourself struggling to make the time to do it, whatever it is, you're probably not gonna succeed at it. There's a guitar that's in my house collecting dust because I just don't make the time to play it. I look over, I'm like, oh, I wish I was better, but I didn't make the time to do it. I didn't spend the 10,000 hours or so that I spent on drawing. So if you find the time to do it, you're going to succeed. Eventually you will succeed.
Don't give up. Do it for yourself. At the end of the day, it's art is to make you happy, and it's to make you happy and you alone. And it's a really hard lesson that it's taken me a long time to learn, but you need to learn to draw for yourself and for your own happiness, ultimately. So my best advice is just enjoy it for yourself. Try new things. Don't just get stuck in one style. Try a bunch of different stuff. You never know what you'll enjoy the most, but just do it to make yourself happy.
Keep at it. Keep at it, always keep at it. If you love doing it, don't let somebody tell you that you're not good enough or whatever, because you're always going to get better. You know, and on the other side of that, anybody that tells you how great they are probably will never get better. You know, they'll always be at that level. So, I mean, you're always working to get better, and you should always work to get better, look at stuff and try to understand how it was done.
Just keep working at your craft. Even if you're a good artist, as you get more experience, you start getting better and better and better. If you just kind of get stuck and you don't really grow very much, then you're not drawing enough. So I'd say just keep drawing, learn as much as you can, observe other people's work, see what they're doing, because everybody falls into this. When I draw a hand, I approach it the same way every time. So when I see somebody else's hand, I always go, wow, that is a really nice hand. But it's not any better than mine, it's just different because they approach it differently. And they're looking at mine liking it. So it's really important to find different ways that they do something, trying to incorporate that into your repertoire.
Well, guys, you have a ton of avenues that were not available to myself when I was coming into the business. With the internet being as prominent as it is now, there's a million art sites for people to look at your work. You have an electronic portfolio. You don't have to cart around giant things anymore. You come to see me at a show. Bring your phone. I'll be happy to look through it at your work. In fact, I've set up at Wizard it was on Sundays. It looks like we may be moving it to Saturdays. I do an hour of portfolio review at a panel, and I'm happy to look at your work there. So use all these things that are available to you. There's a lot more self-publishing available as well. A lot more avenues for that, like Amazon. It's Kickstarter affords you the ability. So don't get frustrated. Just think about things. Think about don't give up for sure. But if you're getting to a block, take a minute, step back, and think about other avenues you might not have considered. Sometimes we get a little closed off, and we put blinders on and just look forward at that tunnel vision. And there's other things out there. There's a lot of avenues now, so definitely do not get frustrated and keep plugging away.
Be persistent. Stick to it. If you are truly passionate about what you do, find a way. There's more opportunities now than there ever was before with self-publishing, the social media scene, web comics. There is a way. If you are persistent enough, if you are passionate enough, you will find a way.
Tried and true method of trying to get into the field is to just keep drawing, stay positive, stay dedicated to your craft, and just be persistent. It's like, it's good. It's better to be to show your stuff around, because you're going to need that criticism in order to improve. If you don't have that criticism, then you're just going to be, happily continuing doing what you're doing, and then it's like you're going to be wondering why you're not getting work. Well, the reason why you're not getting work is that they see something, and they might not even tell you. They see something that you're lacking and that you need to work on. But again, like I said, they might not even tell you. So, we have these conventions around where it's like you could ask me or another artist and say, hey, could you take a look at a couple pages and let me know what you think? And so I think that's the best thing that you can do for yourself and your career.
Watching Beyond the Comic Panels. All right. I'm Mustafa Musa, and you're watching Beyond the Comic Panels. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, there you go. Some of the best free advice you'll ever receive about getting into the comic book business. I'm sure some of it you may have possibly heard before, but I'm pretty sure a good majority of it was fresh and insightful. But just like anything else in life, you really can be given all the free advice in the world, but what it really comes down to is real life experiences to help mold you and your art, writing, animation, publishing, etc. into something you can be proud of. I hope this documentary has given you the inspiration, hope, and drive to take the next step into being a comic book artist, writer, publisher, or even an animator. Hone your skills, don't be afraid of constructive criticism, and take chances. If you don't take that first huge step and take a chance, you may regret it for the rest of your life. The creative power is within you. Don't be afraid of what others think and say about what you want to do. Make yourself happy and everything else good will follow. Don't give up. Work hard and fight to obtain your dreams. Nobody else will. With that said, I'm Jason Garris for Beyond the Comic Panels. Thank you for watching.
What would you try to avoid, and in what way? Avoid traffic accidents. Avoid vans that have free candy written on the side. I would avoid those. Stubbing your toe. Legos on the floor. I would avoid those. Not sure. So what's the direction of this question going in?